I don't want to spend time on this, but I'm going to put some code into Slack. It's just how to create a drop-down element. We all see those in forms, like if you're selecting a state or maybe a city or something. So I'm just going to put some code into Slack that you can use in your forms if you want. If you want to do this during the next exercise time. But just so you have it. So there you go. It didn't line up quite perfectly there in Slack, but so this is an example if I want to create a drop down with a couple of state choices. So the select element itself is where you would put the name attribute. Then each option has a value. And you can see here in this example in Slack that, for example, the first option, the value is Alabama, lowercase. But what's visible in the drop down is capital AL. So it's just to demonstrate that what you put in between the option tags that the user sees, it doesn't have to be the same thing as the value of that option that maybe you're going to send to the server or something. So just something to keep in mind. I think states are a really good example of that because usually you see the two-letter abbreviation, but they may be actually sending the entire state name to the server. And then this other thing, if you look on the Montana option, it says selected equals true. What do you guys think selected equals true is going to do in a drop-down menu? Yeah, so Jason's got it. It's the default value. So maybe if you have 50 states, but you wanted to start on Nevada or something, the selected equals true is going to be the selection that's going to be the first one by default that you see. Cool. Very nice. Okay, so let's move forward to the jQuery stuff because that's the really fun, interesting information. So in tandem with the jQuery, I want to point out a really important feature of JavaScript, or really important method rather, called prevent default. Has anyone heard of prevent default before? Okay, it's a little wonky. It's not like the sexiest thing in JavaScript, but it's really, really important, and I want to show you why. So let me share my screen again. And I think Adam's underwater. Okay, there we go. Thanks, buddy. I was about to mute you. So let me share my screen, and let me show you what this prevent default does. So a form, by default, is a device that sends data somewhere. A form wants you to fill in some data, and then it's going to send it to a server or to some website. So by default, it wants to essentially refresh the page. It's going to send that form somewhere, and then the page is going to refresh. And let me show you an example of that in the form that I created. So let me clean that up a little bit. So if I refresh my page down here, I have my form. Let me put a submit button, which you guys will need to do as well. So I'm going to put a submit button here on my form, which is another type of input. So you guys can create another input tag, and then the type is going to be submit. And generally, you can put the submit wherever, but generally you want it at the bottom of the form, right? You want it right inside that closing form tag, kind of at the bottom. So when I click the submit button, it's going to look up here at the opening form tag. So the opening form tag tells this form to send this data to google.com. That's the default behavior for this form. And to see that, when I click submit here, I just put some garbage in here and I hit submit, it actually goes to Google's web page. Now it's not really doing anything, or it's not like accessing Google's servers, but I just do that to represent that whatever the action is in the opening form tag, that's where you're sending this data, and the page is going to refresh by default. Now for our form, we don't want the page to refresh. In fact, we want to stay on the same page to collect the jQuery data. Maybe we put a search field or a search form in our application. So maybe we put something we're searching for and we hit search. We don't want the page to refresh. Maybe we just want the pertinent information to bubble up to the top or something. In these types of situations, we want to use this method called prevent default. It's essentially going to turn off the default behavior of whatever element that you put it on. So let's see this in action. And to do so, let me put some code here in my script.js to get this up and running. So the very basic code we can do is I'm going to put a document.ready, which again is going to make sure that the document, that the DOM is rendered before this script runs, just in case there's something in this script that is dependent on the DOM being rendered. It's always a good practice just to put this in here. So I've got my document.ready function. I'm going to add a submit event listener to my form element. And so that's going to look like so. Just going to grab that form tag, and then we'll do .submit on it. And submit is going to take a callback. So we talked about callbacks on Friday. So what do I want to happen when this form is submitted properly? Well, the quick and dirty answer is that I don't want it to do anything. I don't want it to go to google.com. I don't want it to do its default behavior. So I'm going to put an prevent default right here. Now, E is short for what? What do you guys think that E is shorthand for?
Is it element?
Close. Yeah, element's a good guess. It's not element though. So what type of method is .submit? And Aaron's on the right page. Yeah, it's an event. So we're essentially telling this event to not do its default behavior. So to do this, let's put in, I'm going to do this longhand. Sometimes you'll see e.prevent default, but just so it's a little clearer, I'll put event. So we'll put prevent default. And then let me go back to my form. Refresh that. And then when I click submit, it's not going to go to google.com. So I'm turning off the default behavior of that form using this event prevent default. This is a really handy method. So something just kind of tuck away. If you ever have a situation where you don't want the page to refresh, that method is going to save you a lot of pain. So just something to keep in mind. Any questions about prevent default, what that's doing? Cool. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do really quickly. I just like to do this to make sure that my JavaScript is wired up correctly. I'm going to put a quick console log right here in this document.ready function, just to make sure that my script and my jQuery is loading correctly, just to make sure I'm not getting any errors. So when I go back and check my console in my DevTools, I see that when I refresh the page that I get this working message. So just want to do that quickly to make sure that my jQuery script is working, that it's in the right order, that my script.js is loaded correctly. So I think we're in good shape. And I'm going to keep this window open right here. Cool. So now let's actually see how to use jQuery to capture the input data from this form. Now, in subsequent units, we're actually going to be grabbing this data and wrapping it and sending it to a server and such. But for this example, I just want to grab the input values and console log them to the browser. Whew, that's a big yawn. Who was that?
JJ.
Oh, cool. JJ, you mind muting yourself? But I appreciate the enthusiasm. Thank you. All right, so let's capture the input for the first name field. So that the first field here in our form. This is where that name, first name, is going to come in really handy. So when we get to full stack applications, like Christine said, this name is going to help direct this data to specific fields in our database. But for now, we're also going to use it to grab the specific data from these specific input boxes in our form. And so what this is going to look like is we know that this is going to be an input field. So if we create a jQuery object for input, but that's not really specific enough, right? Because all of these are input fields. So how do we make sure that we grab the correct one? Well, one way to do that is we can add kind of an argument here. So grab the input field where name equals, in this case, first name. So this acts kind of like an ID in that it's a way to make fields really specific. So generally you wouldn't want to have the same name attribute on multiple fields because sometimes wires can get crossed. You may send data inadvertently to different places in your database that you don't want to. So it's a good practice to try to keep these unique. Cool, so that's actually going to select that specific first name field. And then I'm going to do .val. So .val is a very handy jQuery method. It gets the value of something. It also adds the value inside of something. So if I wanted to add the value here, I could put like a string or some other something within the parentheses, and I'll actually add that argument as a value, whatever I put between those parentheses. If the parentheses are empty, it's going to get or collect the value of that element. So that's going to grab that input. I'm going to go ahead, let's create a variable to assign this input to, just to be proper. So I'll call this first name field. You can name it whatever you want. So the variable first name field will grab the specific user input. And then let me console log that field. I'm going to use some template strings. I'll say first name, and then here use our awesome ES 2015 syntax. And so here I'm going to put in the name of the field that I want to console log. Excuse me, the name of the variable right here. So this is going to be first name field. So ideally, the way this code is set up is when I hit submit, it's going to console log the value of the first name input field. So let's make sure that this is working and wired up correctly. So let me refresh my browser page here. I'll type in Mark. Then when I hit submit, cool. So it looks like it's wired up pretty nicely. So now I'm console logging first name colon Mark. And so you can follow this same pattern, this input, and then in square brackets, you can do name equals. You can use the same pattern for the rest of your input fields. So this is a really handy strategy to grab the value using jQuery. So let's get to some exercise time. That's an example for you guys. I'm going to Slack out this code if you need some, kind of starter code for reference. Let me stop my screen share. And let me ask you guys, maybe a fist of 5, how are you feeling about what we just went through, how to capture user input using jQuery? Maybe a 5 being it makes perfect sense, a 1 is very confusing, a couple of 3s. Okay, cool. Cool, so that's right where you should be. I'm going to put this code into Slack for your reference, and then I'm going to put you guys back into breakout rooms, and I'll hop around and help you guys. But follow the pattern that I just did and see if you can get the input from some other field and practice with that. Cool. Any questions before I put us back into breakout rooms? All right, cool. Here we go.
Mark, you want to pause the recording?
Yeah, thanks.